Butterbean knocked him into another dimension.
He's a tough man.
Bro, he could punch.
He was, what did they used to call him, the king of the 4-rounders?
Yeah.
Because he's so big, he ain't going the distance.
450 fucking pounds.
So all his fights would be 4 rounds, so he could go out there and windmill people.
What a goddamn...
Eric Butterbean Esch isn't an average fighter. He is a human smashing ball. And when he hits, it feels like a car crash. No chance of recovery. Just the brutal impacts. He walks into the ring, looking less like a fighter and more like a lazy ass person who just likes to sit and eat. But this guy has the stamina to make the opponents think about their life choices. He sucks the energy out of his opponents and then knocks them out with just a single punch.
The Butterbean, he's a big one, that's for sure. He's a man who won how many tough man contests?
He won several regional tournaments and got to the national finals twice before being bested there. And you'd have to fight 4 times in one night. 3 one-minute rounds, and they were your fights all the way through. So you fight 4 times in a night.
This man had hands so heavy, the earth probably trembled every time he threw a punch. His opponents must have felt the gravity shift every time he wound up for a hit. It was almost a warning that dare to mess with the bean, and you'll be seeing stars for real.
A man who was considered unorthodox because of his physique that did not fit the mold of a professional boxer entered the ring for a title fight.
Shake hands. Good luck to both of you.
He won that fight by knockout and became the IBA heavyweight champion.
Now, let's talk about Butterbean's training routine. Most fighters walk in with chiseled six-packs and intense focus, like they've been training with monks in the mountains or something. But Butterbean? He didn't give a damn about having washboard abs. He went straight for his opponents' faces with fists that felt like cinder blocks, landing punches that could have leveled a small building. The result? Lights out. Butterbean was the ultimate underdog, the anti-fitness icon with the confidence of a guy who knew exactly who he was. And he was there to wreck anyone who stood in his way.
Tournaments and got to the national finals twice before being bested there. And you'd have to fight 4 times in one night. 3 one-minute...
Every time he stepped into the ring, Butterbean turned boxing on its head. Let's talk about the fights that turned Butterbean from a curiosity into a legend. First up, Doug "Dangerous" Norris. Now, Doug wasn't just some random guy looking to make a name. He already had one. The man was called Dangerous for a reason. He'd been out there knocking down people. Doug's strategies seemed to boil down to one thought, that Butterbean was some overgrown Humpty Dumpty he could knock over with a couple of good swings.
And his opponent across the ring, fighting out of the...
When the bell rang, Doug Norris came out swinging, full of confidence, probably thinking he was about to have Butterbean spread across his highlight reel. But Butterbean? Oh, he'd had his own pre-fight routine, one that involved spicy chicken and a soda. Instead of a lean, mean boxing machine, Doug found himself staring down to the angry human bulldozer, fueled by fast food and ready to break things. Sure, Doug's punches landed, if you could call it that, but honestly, they just seemed to warm Butterbean up. It was like Doug had walked up to a dragon and politely asked if he could poke it a few times. Bad move.
They clashed heads, and that's what hurt Doug Norris. I was joking, but that was the problem. Well, it's wild now, folks, and there goes Doug Norris. Well, he never should have slugged with him.
When Butterbean decided he'd had enough of Doug's antics, he went into full wrecking ball mode. And let me tell you, when Butterbean's right hook finally landed, Doug went down faster than a stack of cards in a hurricane. One punch was all it took to turn Dangerous Doug into a soft, harmless memory on Butterbean's resume. Doug might have walked into that ring with a predatory gleam, but he left as Butterbean's latest KO snack, crumpled on the floor, realizing he'd severely underestimated this freight train of a man.
Here comes Pat Jackson, who is a fledgling pro. He is just 1-1. He's a big guy by most standards, 6'5" and 273.
And then came Pat Jackson. Now, Jackson strutted into the ring, pretending to be the guy who'd finally cracked the code on Butterbean. In his mind, he'd figured out this walking beer keg who, in Jackson's opinion, was too slow, too heavy, and too winded to be a real threat. Jackson wanted to be the one to show the world what it looked like to take Butterbean down. Mind you, Jackson was no lightweight himself. The man had a rep for heavy punches and could hold his own against some serious fighters. But when he stepped into the ring with Butterbean, all that went straight out the window.
His hands are down.
He would not care if he was disqualified.
No, not at this juncture. He's got nothing left at all.
At first, Butterbean seemed like he was taking his time, sizing up Jackson, or maybe just deciding if he liked his opponent well done or medium rare. Whatever it was, Jackson took it as an opportunity, going all in and throwing his best. The next round was pure chaos. Butterbean came out with a speed that didn't seem physically possible for a guy his size, and Jackson, who had swaggered in like a tank, suddenly looked more like a deer staring down headlights. Butterbean didn't give him a second to think, throwing jabs and hooks like he was unloading a lifetime supply of frustration.
The fight is stopped not because Terry Wood got knocked down, but because Pat Jackson doesn't want to go on, and one happy guy is Terry Wood, who doesn't have to ref anymore. Well, the Bean, is he get a double knockout on this one?
When it was all over, Pat Jackson was left, sagging on the ropes, utterly done. He didn't even have the energy to pretend he could keep going. When he tapped out, there was no shame. Any sane person would have done the same. Meanwhile, Butterbean casually celebrated, probably with a double order of chicken wings, as if he'd just finished a normal day at the office. Jackson's dreams of toppling the giant vanished, while Butterbean left the ring, barely looking winded, as if he'd just completed his afternoon warm-up. Let's talk about the showdown between Butterbean and Billy Eaton, a guy who thought he could step up to the heavyweight king of everything deep-fried and dangerous. Eaton walked in thinking he'd chew through Butterbean, but things went a little differently. They threw punch after punch, toe-to-toe, neither one willing to back down, and by the end of it, the judges called it a draw. And if you're thinking Butterbean took that lying down, oh, you're so wrong. That draw just left him hungrier, like he'd been promised a feast and only got the appetizer.
In boxing.
Now he gets in 2 solid body punches to Eaton's.
So fast forward to the rematch, and Butterbean didn't just show up. He showed up starving for a fight. From the second that bell went off, Butterbean stormed forward, ready to turn Eaton into his own personal buffet. Eaton threw some punches, sure, but Butterbean wasn't there to trade shots. He was there to feast. By the final round, Eaton looked like he'd been tossed around in a blender, and Butterbean? He ended the fight with a knockout so dramatic, so absolute, Eaton was left laid out on the canvas like he'd just been gobbled up.
There's the body attack.
Get him out.
This is when you start looking for oxygen.
Well, if he can hold and stand up for 4 more minutes.
Then came Jonathan Whitfield, aka the Bull. Whitfield was one of those guys who thought if he looked intimidating enough, he'd have the edge. He strutted into the ring with big muscles. Whitfield's hulking frame didn't faze him one bit. Butterbean wasn't just ready for this fight. He was ready to turn this supposed bull into a nice batch of ground beef.
And right now, Jonathan Whitfield slashing the jab, keeping the distance, 1 minute away from getting out of the first round.
Yeah, they called Whitfield the Spider-Man because he has long arms and long...
Whitfield came out swinging, putting his whole body into every punch, thinking he'd finally found Butterbean's Achilles heel. But every hit he threw just bounced right off the beam, as if he'd tried to punch a brick wall with a pair of marshmallows. Butterbean didn't even flinch. It was like he was made of cast iron, just waiting for Whitfield to tire himself out. And then, like a matador who's done playing, Butterbean went in for the kill. His punches weren't just punches. They were mini earthquakes, each one sending shockwaves through Whitfield's towering frame. The crowd watched in awe as the Bull went from charging and raging to stumbling and wobbling, clearly realizing he'd bitten off way more than he could chew.
Joe L. Scott, rising young heavyweight, in a terrific affair. And now Whitfield is helped up, and that is it.
Helped up and helped out.
Yes, Michael Ortega stops the fight. That is enough for Jonathan Whitfield. And Butterbean's a 20-game win.
All right, let's get into one of the boldest, most jaw-dropping moments in Butterbean's career, his showdown with Jackie Bird. Now, Bird had height, reach, and the swagger of a guy who probably thought he'd just stepped into his own highlight reel. With Bird's confidence at an all-time high, Butterbean spotted his moment. And in one colossal right hook, he swung. Bird went flying into the ropes like he'd just been hit by a bus. It wasn't just a knockout. It was a full-on reality check that wiped Bird's cocky grin right off his face. The crowd went nuts. By the time he staggered to his feet, his whole untouchable act was gone, replaced by the stunned expression of someone who just received a hard dose of Butterbean-style humility.
Very significant fact. And it's a clean right hand right on the chin. I mean, woo-wee.
There it is, good shot.
Then there's the big what if that hovers over Butterbean's entire career. What if he had stepped into the ring with the Mike Tyson? By the late 90s, Butterbean wasn't just a knockout artist. He was practically the poster child for what happens when raw power meets a no-nonsense attitude. His record was an ongoing list of KOs that had left opponents looking like they'd survived a train wreck. And fans couldn't get enough of it. So naturally, the idea of a Butterbean versus Tyson's face-off started buzzing around.
That one. Within like a day or two, it had 5 million views.
That's not you.
No, it's not me.
Everybody online thinks that's
no,
you.
That's not. If you listen to it, it's not me. It's some English dude.
That is so funny.
Yep. Of course, it never happened, and Tyson's camp was careful to steer him clear of the match. And who can blame them? Butterbean wasn't just another fighter. He was unpredictable, unorthodox, and had enough brute force to make anyone think twice. Tyson, famous for his rapid-fire strikes and head movement, might have had a hard time against Butterbean's steamroller approach. And though the two never met in the ring, the thought of that clash just made Butterbean's legend grow even bigger. Fans are still asking themselves, could Butterbean's monstrous fists have overwhelmed Tyson? Or would Tyson's speed have been enough to dodge Butterbean's powerhouse swings? It's the kind of question that makes every boxing fan wish they could rewrite history, just to see how it would have played out.